In Flanders Fields, remains to this day one of the most memorable war poems ever written. It is a lasting legacy of the terrible battle in the spring of 1915. Here is the story of the making of that poem. Although he had been a doctor for years and had served in the South African War, it was impossible to get used to the suffering, the screams, and the blood. Major John McCrae had seen and heard enough in his dressing station to last him a lifetime. As a surgeon attached to the 1st Field Artillery Brigade, Major McCrae had spent 17 days treating injured Canadians and our allies. It had been an ordeal that he had hardly thought possible. McCrae wrote that at the end of the first day, if anyone had told us we had to spend 17 days there, we would have folded our hands and said it could not have been done. One death particularly affected McCrae. A young friend and former student, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer of Ottawa, had been killed by a shell burst on the 2nd of May 1915. Lieutenant Helmer was buried later that day in the little cemetery outside McCrae's dressing station. McCrae performed the funeral ceremony in the absence of the chaplain. The next day, sitting on the back of an ambulance parked near the Canal de l'Isère, McCrae vented his anguish by composing a poem. The Major was no stranger to writing, having authored several medical texts besides dabbling in poetry. In the nearby cemetery, McCrae could see the wild poppies that sprang up in the ditches in that part of Europe, and he spent 20 minutes of precious rest time scribbling 15 lines of verse in a notebook. A young soldier watched him write it. Cyril Allinson, a 22-year-old sergeant major, was delivering mail that day when he spotted McCrae. The major looked up as Allinson approached, then went on writing while the sergeant major stood there quietly. His face was very tired but calm as we wrote, Allinson recalled. He looked around from time to time, his eyes strained to Helmer's grave. When McCrae finished 5 minutes later, he took his mail from Allinson and, without saying a word, handed his pad to the young NCO. Allinson was moved by what he read. The poem was an exact description of the scene in front of them. He used the word blow in that line because the poppies actually were being blown that morning by a gentle east wind. It never occurred to them that it would ever be published. It just seemed to be an exact description of the scene. In fact, it was very nearly not published. Dissatisfied with it, McCrae tossed the poem away, but a fellow officer retrieved it and sent it to newspapers in England. The Spectator, in London, rejected it, but Punch published it on the 8th of December 1915. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow. Between the crosses row on row. That mark our place, and in the sky. The larks, still bravely singing, fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. Loved and were loved, and now we lie. In Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die. We shall not sleep, though poppies grow. In Flanders Fields. Take some time today to remember all those, who have sacrificed so much. So that we have the freedoms we enjoy today. Thanks to all who have and continue to serve. We owe you a debt we cannot repay. But we are forever grateful for your services and ultimate sacrifices.